All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Jonna Emke, and I'm the Senior Marketing Manager here at CoreLogic. I'd like to welcome you all to today's webinar, Black Summer Bushfires, Lessons Learned and the Regions Most Impacted. To ensure a successful session today, I'd just like to cover off a few quick housekeeping items. All attendees will be muted today to avoid any background noise and to minimize any interruptions for our presenters. Webinars, as you know, are bandwidth intensive, so for best viewing, we encourage everyone to be using reliable internet connection. We also suggest that you log off your VPN and close any programs or browser sessions running in the background. If you find during the presentation that your slides appear to be running behind, pushing your F5 on your keyboard will help to refresh the page and get you back up to speed. All today's tools, the engagement tools on your webinar console, can be moved, resized, and closed. You can maximize the slide area to a full screen simply by clicking on the arrows in the top right corner of the slide widget. We welcome and encourage questions for our presenters. Please submit them through the Q&A box on your console. Our speakers will be answering all of our questions at the end of today's sessions. Our recording will be provided after the presentation along with the slides. You'll be sent these via email. If you're having any other additional technical issues or questions, you can also engage the help tool at the bottom of your screen. I'd like to now introduce you to our presenters. Pierre is CoreLogic's Head of Consulting and Risk Management Solutions. He's a Senior Global Risk Transfer Director with more than 20 years experience across all aspects of risk transactions, including reinsurance, underwriting, catastrophe risk management, portfolio management, structured risk, and ILS fund management. Pierre is focused on the financial impact of the hazard and climate change to the financial industry, government, and investment segments here at CoreLogic. Eugene is a finance professional with over 20 years experience in digital product strategy and risk management. Over the term of his career, he's led underwriting, risk analytics, quality assurance, valuations, and product management teams. In his current role at CoreLogic, he holds the direct responsibilities for the end-to-end digital solutions supporting our banking and finance segment. He also holds an executive MBA degree with the Australian Graduate School of Management. Welcome, Pierre and Eugene.
Thank you, Jonna. But first, on behalf of CoreLogic, we would like to begin by acknowledging and paying our respects to the Guayamagal people, the traditional custodians of the land on which we are addressing you today in Sydney. We would like to pay our respects to the elders, past, present, and emerging. So today, we would like to present you a view of the bushfire season 2019-2020, which is very vivid in everyone's obviously memory. And we focus particularly on that season to come up with a support to the financial industry by developing a system to monitor and identify individual properties which would have been potentially impacted by the bushfire. So why did we develop this solution? Well, first, let's review the bushfire season in Australia and put it into context. So as we can see on that slide, the bushfire activity is not just contained to Australia. We're all aware, obviously, of the fires that have been quite dramatic in California specifically, but also it occurs in all the various regions in the world, such as Brazil and also Siberia. But to put things into context here, we've only mentioned one of the Australian bushfire, the 2001 bushfire, the Victoria Black Saturday bushfire. because it's one which is very well remembered, unfortunately, in our memories as being one of the most devastating one. And you can see, I don't need to describe all of the numbers, but you can see that the impact of area being burned, and that figure is given in hectares, that the area being burned has been subsequently completely dwarfed by what we've seen around the world. So in Australia alone, around this 2019-2020, it's nearly 18 million of hectares being burned. Now, in order to put and to be true to what happened at that time, there were also a lot of fires in Siberia. But just to put things into context, Siberia is twice the size of Australia. So it means that Australia would have, in terms of area being impacted, is definitely one of the worst case around the world, unfortunately. I'm not dismissing what happened in the US. California has taken the brunt as well. And perhaps all throughout the United States, the area might have been a little bit 2 or 3 times that amount that we've seen in California. So, now what we're going to see and to show you is how CoreLogic has been able to identify properties in the vicinity of this area being burnt, and therefore potentially impacted. And that's quite an exciting methodology. First, what we've done is to use satellite imagery from, and we're taking the data from the Sentinel-2 satellite, which is a European-based satellite, and which is currently working and obviously orbiting the Earth. What we're doing is, with the satellite, it is acquiring systematically optical imagery of high spatial resolution, obviously over land and over coastal waters. And we will review at a high level how we identify all the area being impacted by bushfire. So first, we start to download a lot of images, a lot of from different wavelengths. You're probably all quite familiar with what a satellite is able to capture. It is by specific signature from various wavelengths, from the optical, infrared, short-wave infrared, and we are acquiring those data. We treat them, and then we apply a lot of ratios in order to extract the features which are relevant, obviously, to bushfire. We apply what we called the near normalized burn ratio that identify effectively the lack of vegetation using specific wavelengths. We also extract the burnt area index, which are taking advantage of not only the visible, but also the short infrared, and other ratios like the normalized difference water index. All of these indices are well known and are used in satellite monitoring. But here, the crucial point is to be able to extract all these images all over Australia and apply this ratio and ultimately identify the area which are relevant. So we effectively, ultimately, combine and merge this data in a single set of image with the feature that we identified. Given the amount of data, we've got another step, which is called to flatten the image in order to get a simpler way to handle this data. We do also another step, which is to check our classification. against all the shortwave infrared images. And on that little image here, that we will explore in a minute, we identify an area which is burned here, contoured by a red line. And once we've got this area identified, we can match it against our property and our portfolio of properties. And here we can see the ones which are obviously contained within the area being burned. Here, the blue dots are the properties burnt area, and in yellow is the properties which are impacted by that, by the bushfire. So what we would like to show you is through this animation is, for instance, how the situation is evolving through time, and how we collect and ultimately reassess the situation through time. Here we just took a very specific sampled area, which is obviously located near the Batsman's Bay, which has been heavily impacted during this bushfire. And what we can see on this animation is how we're able to obviously not to be to identify the area being burned, but also not to identify clouds, which obviously could be misleading, and ultimately see how those bushfires have been progressing through time. You can see how the area being burned is growing. And I hope that this animation, obviously one with the clouds, as you can see, and the other one without clouds, just to make your focus on the area being burned only. But you can see how there is a lot of information being treated. Now, to show you the extent of the data we're able to observe and also to report to you, and that's why this exercise is quite efficient, we will show you in the next animation how it works for all of Australia. So this slide shows how we've been able to capture for all of Australia, all the area which has been burnt. Now, as you can imagine, this is a humongous area that we're able to treat. And every week, we are able to capture the area being burned and update the map. The graph shows how we can ultimately capture the accumulated amount of area being burned, and is presented in terms of hectares, which is commonly used here. We will come back to that map. We will identify the area which is most impacted, but from that perspective, you can see that it occurs all over Australia. The area of Western Australia has been impacted, not so much where there was some populated area. We can spot Kangaroo Island, which is well known for have been dreadfully impacted, and obviously the southern part of New South Wales that we are all very aware. Now, identifying the area being burned is interesting, but it's not really ultimately what we want to know. We want to know which property are being impacted. And that's what we're going to see in the next slide. On that slide, there should have been an animation through time. Here we can see the overall view as of mid-February 2020. And all these bright orange dots correspond to properties which would have been affected by the burnt area. So it's not a burnt map, it's a map of properties now that are being affected. We just focused obviously on this southern part of New South Wales, where the bushfire have been the most devastating, and how this bushfire affected most the population. So what we do now is to link it also to you and to how your problems, from a financial perspective, how you've been affected. And what we would like to do is to conduct a poll in order for you to provide a view on how this black summer affected your business. So as a lender, what was your biggest concern during and after these black summer fires? Was it implementing appropriate hardship measures, or managing, obviously, risk exposure and impacted assets? Why should it be more proactive at supporting and helping your customers? Or ultimately, it falls into addressing the climate change impact for your company. So, Jonah, I think, could you?
Sure. So everyone, on your screen, you should be able to click a selection. We usually give our guests about 20 seconds to make their choice. I'll give you a few more minutes, and then we will show you the poll results. Thank you, everyone. We have quite a bit of input. Here you go, Pierre.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for these insights. Indeed, helping customers is very much what we want to do, and first and foremost. And effectively, through this methodology, you can address specifically the properties and therefore your customers that are being impacted. So you don't have to blanket a whole postcode, if I may say, use a whole postcode and say, let's call all these people in that postcode. Through that methodology, you can just call the ones which you know have been impacted or within the area of a bushfire. So it's quite precise, it's much more efficient. Obviously, once you know that, you're able to manage your overall risks and impacting assets, and then apply your measures. And it falls into the climate change impact discussion. So I think this poll is quite neat, because it really points out the key issues for the financial institution and banking specifically. On that note, I will hand over to my colleague Eugene Vasiliev, who is going to discuss more specifically how banks can use this information and what it means for them.
Thank you, Pierre, and hello, everyone. So let's now talk about the practical implications of the Black Summer bushfires and developing the high precision tool that Pierre was just covering. So on this slide, so you can see the list of some communities that were most impacted by the bushfires. And so this list is ranked by the sum of property values in relation to their proximity to the burnt area. So in this instance, located within 100 meters of the burnt area. So there are obviously a lot of numbers on this page, a busy slide, but what I really would like to draw your attention to is this one thing, that even though there are big numbers, scary numbers, I think none of them are of particular surprise to people on this call, but there are some suburbs on this list where only a small percentage, or relatively small percentage in relation to total dwellings, were actually impacted by the bushfires. And so note that we're talking about suburbs here, so very, very precise, not postcodes, but like individual specific suburbs. And so there are examples that you can see where that percentage is actually in single digits. So you can see examples like Port Macquarie and Taree in New South Wales, where like it really is like a small percentage of impacted properties located in those suburbs. Then, of course, like a flip side, where there are some suburbs where a lot of properties, most properties were unfortunately impacted. Like you can see Amguri at the bottom of the list, 91% of properties were impacted by the bushfires. But what you'll probably know that a lot of these areas are smaller regional towns that are located either in close proximity to or in the middle of bushland. And so it will become clear why I asked you to focus on that as we go through the rest of the presentation and we go into a specific use case, and why it is important to really identify the geographic footprint of these disasters at a very granular level and use high precision tools like the one that we've been discussing so far. The other important aspect to note is wide geographic dispersion of the bushfires at the time. So it is important to really form a nationwide view of how these disasters are progressing and not just rely on very localized data sources. And even though, so New South Wales were obviously quite heavily featured in the media, but like you can see on the map, it's like it was a true nationwide event. And in fact, if you think back to the previous slide, the area that was most impacted by the bushfire in terms of the number of properties and the dollar value of them wasn't actually in New South Wales at all. It was in Kalamunda, you can see on the map here, which is east of Perth. And so most other states were impacted significantly as well. So areas of Woodside and Lobethal in Adelaide Hills, also over 1,500 properties were impacted by the bushfires, valued at over $600 million. And as we progress along the sea border, there are areas in east coast of New South Wales and like Batemans Bay, Nowra, Merimbula, areas of ACT, so more than 2,600 properties impacted in those areas. Areas of New South Wales Central Coast and Mid-North and Mid-Coast, Port Macquarie and Lake Cathy, so over 3,000 properties impacted. And then further up in Queensland, so you can see areas in like in the country like Warwick and but also parts of Brisbane impacted, 1,200 properties. So hopefully you get a sense, and obviously you should be pretty fresh in our memories, I think, and so we all remember that the impact was significant. So what that means, I guess, for people on the call in terms of you as lenders, as insurers, as valuers, utilities providers, is that you would have almost certainly had the impact to some or many of the impacted areas. So here's a state-based summary of what I was just talking about. So the largest dollar impact is obviously in New South Wales, as you would expect, so more than $17.5 billion in terms of property value impacted by the bushfires. So followed by Victoria, 12 billion, and significant numbers in other states as well. So why is this important? Why am I talking about this again? it is important just to give you a sense of like the true size of the disaster. And a lot of lenders and other financial services institutions at the time can realize the significance of the event and were prompted to implement some sort of policy response to mitigate the risks obviously associated with the event. So what that meant in the practical sense is that, like a lot of these areas that we were discussing, they were kind of elevated to the postcode level view, and they were added to to some sort of a high-risk list that most lenders have. And what that's meant in practical sense in terms of the implication on the loan origination and underwriting process and things like that. So a lot of valuations were escalated from AVMs and desktops into short forms, but also the straight declines were also common at the time. So in some instances, these restrictions remain in place to this day, and in some cases, it's I guess a willing decisions that some lenders may take just to, I guess, err on the side of conservativeness and just make sure that they obtain the right valuation type and underwrite these lines appropriately. In some cases, unfortunately, it is a factor of just lack of time and potentially available resources to actually review and maintain those lists. And so obviously all of this is in the environment where the risks associated with the original disaster have probably passed to a large degree. So here's like a fairly typical example of a consequence of such action. So in this example, a national lender in the 12 months following the bushfires completed around 47,000 valuations in the postcodes where some bushfire activity was noted based on the analysis from Pierre was describing. So you would know from our discussion just in the previous slides that a lot of these areas are quite populous. They're located in close proximity to major metropolitan centres. So the large number of these jobs, like it's not necessarily of a significant surprise. But so what is interesting though, if you change your geographic perspective and focus on specific areas and become more granular in your analysis and focus on just specific streets where the impact of the bushfire was most severe. So that number of valuation jobs kind of reduces very significantly to around 1,400. So that's 1,400 valuations out of 47,000 where the bushfire damage was in areas where the bushfire damage was actually the heaviest. So if you think about it in terms of what that means and the impact on valuation costs, the impact on the turnaround time, the general customer experience, and potentially on the business lost, it is quite significant. And so it applies to other disasters as well, not just bushfires, obviously. So if you can identify the impact or the geographic footprint of these disasters at high precision and very low granularity, then you can apply policy restrictions, pricing controls, other risk mitigation steps very specifically to the impacted areas without unnecessarily penalizing a broader group of customers. How do we actually make it work at our end? Like, how do we help you form that very granular view as part of a packaged solution? So it involves a number of steps. First and foremost, we're going to try to be proactive about it and try to identify these events before they occur, so we can plan resources appropriately. And in some cases, it's I guess less straightforward, particularly in the context of our today's topic, bushfires. It's not always readily apparent, where and when these disasters actually start. However, nevertheless, so important to kind of make an effort to be preemptive about identifying these coming disasters. With some of the other disasters, it actually works in a little bit more straightforward way, such as floods, where you can monitor the onset of cyclones and the weather fronts a little bit ahead of time. During the events, it's all really about monitoring how the disaster unfolds. So based on the analysis Pierre was talking about, identifying areas impacted by the disaster, the increasing granularity, and then allowing lenders and the financial services institutions to implement strategies to mitigate those risks as required. After the events, we suggest that a portfolio watch could be undertaken just to identify the impact of on the specific securities and households within the existing portfolios, just to understand the risk exposure, but also to to formulate action that you may take to assist these customers to get over the impact of the bushfires or other disasters. And it is also important to track the progress of these events and to identify the point where the disaster has passed. So these restrictions, they do not remain in place forever. They can actually be adjusted and removed as the risk profile of these areas changes or improves. And so based on our analysis, so depending on the scale of the disaster, so that can be the appropriate timing can be 1 or 2 weeks after the disaster, or in some cases it could take quite a bit of time, maybe a number of months, particularly since there could be a lasting impact on the property market from these disasters, as we've seen with the Black Summer bushfires in 2019 and 2020. Okay, so just a few points to summarize our discussion. So CoreLogic is here to support clients during the bushfire season, and we're very aware that we are heading into summer, and hopefully we will never see a disaster like the Black Summer bushfires repeated again. But look, unfortunately, we can never guarantee that, and so we hopefully you are getting a sense that we're ready to monitor these events and assist the broad set of financial services industry in terms of formulating your response to these events. So the burnt area is automatically captured for all of Australia, and so properties located within a close proximity to a burnt area, 100 meters, can be identified. So we support all aspects of risk mitigation. So it's not just about the disasters in progress. It's also about identifying the future risk of bushfires and linking it to the climate risk. Or climate change scenarios as well, and so estimating the impact on existing portfolio of securities, as we discussed as well. So nevertheless, responding to bushfires and other disasters in progress, that's a big part of it, and allowing like a very granular identification of specific areas of impact, of highest impact, and allowing a strategic application of restrictions just to these areas and not, entire postcodes or broader localities is important. And lastly, it's the important step is to identify the point where the risk of the bushfires or further bushfires of the current event in progress or other natural disasters as well, where it subsides, and so the restrictions can be relaxed or completely removed. So with that, I thank you for your attention. So this concludes the presentation, and so Pierre and myself would be happy to answer any questions you may have. And I will hand it over back to you, Jonna.
Great. Thank you so much, Pierre and Eugene, for an insightful presentation today. Let's jump into our questions. Our first question comes from Jeff. Can you please explain what you mean by valuation strategies? What form do these take?
So valuation strategy can obviously mean a number of things. So what it most commonly refers to is the progress of evaluation, waterfall, where a lot of lenders may choose to rely on an automated valuation for low-risk securities, and then as for high-risk securities, obtain like a desktop or short-form valuations. So obviously, with in the context of this discussion, it's important to make sure that an appropriate valuation type is selected, and lenders do not rely on automated valuations where properties are either subject to a natural disaster in progress or may be damaged by a recent disaster. So that's what we mean by evaluation strategy.
Thanks, Eugene. Our next question: how do you identify future risk of bushfires when there are large areas of bushfires prone?
Rob. I can answer that if you hear me. Thanks for the question. So in terms of future risks, obviously this methodology that we've presented to you today is very much how we monitor an ongoing bushfire season and how we help you to support you on the present, on a weekly basis of how the season is evolving. Now, in order to address future risks, that means having a different set of data. That means you need to have a view and an understanding of what would be the bushfire risk at the property level. At CoreLogic, we've got a view on those risks through our partnership with Munich Re, so we're able to assess and assign a risk score that reflects potential bushfire risks for each and every property.
Great, thanks,
hopefully that address your question.
Great. This one most likely would be a question for Eugene. How do lenders make sure that AVMs are not provided for properties impacted by bushfires?
Sorry, that can be managed via the business rules that a lot of lenders maintain either at their end or within the valuation platforms hosted by us. So where essentially, as these properties get identified, they can be linked to to other data that we hold within Property Bureau, and then we can either support the building of your own rules, or we can create rules that would automatically escalate relevant valuation jobs into a short form. Like we can make sure that any delays associated with valuations are managed, and then we can in some instances we can even cancel jobs if that's what the lenders elect to do. So in that sense, we will not provide like an AVM, where that there's a chance that the properties might be damaged by the bushfires or other disasters. If that answers your question.
Great, thank you. Here is a question around bushfire events. How will you know that the bushfire event and associated risks have passed and policy restrictions can be relaxed?
So I can jump on that as well. So there are a couple of ways. So one is just the ongoing monitoring of the events and progress. So basically relying on the tool that we were just showing, identifying the point where I guess the geographic footprint no longer expands. Or in instance of floods, for example, you can actually pick up a point where the water kind of goes away and it returns to its normal level. And so at that point, so we can say that, okay, well, the risk of this particular disaster in progress may have passed. But in terms of managing the risk associated with like a longer term impact on this area, so there are aspects of the market trends that we can monitor in terms of, understanding the impact on property prices, and importantly also manage and track commentary that's supplied within valuation reports and things like that, identifying fire damage or any other disaster damage to properties. And as we kind of pick up the point where this commentary becomes less prevalent, this could be like a trigger point for us to review whether further restrictions to these areas are necessary.
Great, thanks, Eugene. Being sensitive to the fact that we are at time, I'm just going to cover one more question. I believe that this one would be for you, Eugene, as well. How will the lenders be able to consume this data?
So it is available to be integrated into the business rules, and I was discussing, also available to be for direct integration into the lender's own systems via API as well. So there are a variety of ways that we can obviously discuss depending on the lender's specific circumstances.
All right. I'd like to thank all of our attendees as well as our presenters today for joining us for Black Summer Bushfires webinar. As mentioned at the start, we'll be sending the slides and the recording to all of our attendees tomorrow. Additionally, we're going to be able to offer a on-demand version of the webcast, which will become available on Thursday. It can be easily accessed through the same audience link that you've been provided for today's webinar. Again, thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you on future climate-related webinars. Have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.